Hello. So, welcome to my talk. I'm Paula Carnell, and for those of you who are catching this on the replay, I'm sharing my story of how I went from an artist to a bee speaker. So, today's talk is all about my extraordinary story and how my life changed and how I went from being an artist and then through 7 years of being bed and wheelchair bound, and how I then ended up coming to be a bee lady, a bee expert, a bee speaker. So what I do is I now work all around the world, and I work with honey producers, I work with beekeepers, and I run workshops and talks to educate people about the importance of bees. So bees came into my life in a really unusual way, and I'm often asked about my story and how I got interested in bees and how they came into me. So what I'm going to do is share my story. So we're now live. I've got some people coming in, so that's great. And what I'm going to be doing is waiting a few minutes for a few more people to come in, and then we can actually get going. So if you're on Facebook, then you may need to give permission to actually let people, let me see who you are, because when you comment, I'm not actually going to be able to see. So here we go. Brilliant. The numbers going up. Wonderful. So if you're joining now, if you could just type in the comments and let me know who you are and where you're coming in from, because I know I've got people all around the world. So I'd love to see where you're coming in. So let's have a look. Who have we got here? Oh, hi, Sam. Thank you for coming. Hello, hello. Wonderful. So I'm just going to wait for a few more people to come on, and then I will make a start. So what I'd like you to do as well is type your questions throughout the talk, and then I will answer them at the end. Okay, so that's the plan. Right. I think we've got quite a nice group here. There's people coming in. Hello, hello. Wonderful. It's all working so far. I can see who everybody is. Brilliant. We've got somebody here from Chicago. I know, Lindsay, you're over in Vancouver. So wonderful. Some Somerset people. So great. We're a real global community. So everyone coming together. The bees bring us all together. Oh, hi, Frank. I'm so pleased you're here. So another Chicago person. So that's great. So you're going to learn a bit more about my history. And although you've read the book, Frank, I know you're a great follower of the book. So you already know some of the story. So here we go then. I'm going to be doing some screen sharing. So I'm going to do a slide presentation. It's a bit different to what I would have done if I was on the stage, because obviously I'm not on a stage and I can't see if you're falling asleep or if you're clapping or anything like that. So chatting through on the comments is great. I won't always be able to read them, but at least, you know, I can see them popping up, and that really is encouraging. So I'm here in Somerset in the UK. And as I mentioned earlier on, I was an artist for over 20 years, and I exhibited all around the world. And through quite a serious illness, I spent 7 years bed and wheelchair bound, and that was when the bees came into my life. So it was a big transformation. So this whole period of lockdown has had quite an impact on me, because it reminds me a lot of when I was isolated through illness and I lost my business as an artist. I lost my business, you know, the freedom and being able to come and go. So it's really interesting how this transformation, although it was for me and it was quite solitary while I was ill, I can now see the whole world going through this similar transformation. So it's quite an exciting time. And I'm hoping that by sharing my story, it will inspire you to think a bit more about, well, not only your work with bees, for those of you who do work with bees, but also for people who are interested in nature and want to understand the connection of it, and how health and bees and nature, how it's all connected, and just how much I learned through all of this. So I'm going to start my presentation, and then you will all get to learn a bit more. So I'm Paula Carnell. I'm creating a buzz about health, and here we go. Oh, right. Okay. Let me try again. Right, so it's really good to see so many of you here and from all around the world, so we can be a bit of a global village here, all talking about bees. And I'm really touched because here we've had horrendous storms, so I'm very pleased that some of you have taken the time when there's been a chance that you could be outside enjoying this weather, that you're actually inside and watching me. So here we go. So if you're on Facebook, it would be really great if you can share this talk. So you need to go to your Facebook page and you'll see the like, comment and share. And from there you can share that. You'll get a link and you can then share this event and you can share my talk, and it will be really great to share it amongst other bee people or people that need a bit of inspiration or want to have something cheerful to watch for a time. So I'd be really grateful for that, because I've got a big message that I want to share around the world, and it's just really important that I can inspire as many people as possible. That's my life purpose. So my book is A to B's, and what I'm going to be doing is doing a bit of pre-introduction before the book started, and during this webinar and afterwards you will be able to download an ebook version of this book, and this gives you an idea of the book. So there's 50 little chapters in there, and it's all about my journey, A to B's. You'll learn a lot about bees, you'll learn a lot about Oman, you'll learn a bit about health, you'll learn about different things to do with bees and nutrition, and how I've come to be where I am now. So add your questions, insights or comments as we go, and then I'll go through at the end and I'll answer any questions. So I was born in Weymouth in Dorset, which is a seaside town, and I've moved about 30 miles in my whole life, so I've not come that far. So I'm really a Dorset girl, but I feel I've emigrated because I now live in Somerset. So here I am on a busy street in Weymouth in a pram, and always smiling, so I haven't changed too much there. And here I am at about 3 years old, and I love this picture because I've got a pretend camera. Now, those of you who follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I'm always taking pictures, and I love taking pictures. And whenever I travel anywhere, I take hundreds, I mean, even thousands of pictures. My trip to Bhutan, I had about 2,500 photographs from 3 weeks. And so I've always loved capturing moments. And I suppose that comes from being an artist. And even when I was a child, I would draw. But at this stage, perhaps before I could capture what I really wanted, I would just take pictures. So I didn't have a real camera, but I had a pretend camera. So I was starting that way. And here I am, age 16, after my O-level exams, and I had my first solo exhibition in Yeovil in Somerset. So again, only about 10 miles from here. And this exhibition was work that I had done during my school years. I used to just draw all the time. And I was really passionate about earning a living as an artist. I knew that this was really, really important to me. So many people say, oh, you can't earn a living as an artist. And I was just determined to prove everybody wrong. So I did. And I had this exhibition and I sold out. And it was just a fabulous, fabulous start to my career. And it came just after I'd had a really bad ending to my schooling. So I wasn't very academic, and I'd actually done really badly in my exams. So I was put into an art school after my head teacher had done a bit of a deal with the art school. So it was all based on my portfolio and the quality of the work I had. So I'd got into art school, but it wasn't the start I wanted. I hadn't got into the colleges I wanted, which could have led me on a different path. So in some ways, I'd always picked the tough path. So there we go. I had these paintings, and I know that there's some people who are joining me today who've got some of those early paintings, and for that I'm really grateful. And so I carried on and I went through art school, and then I traveled to America, and then I came back, and in 1990 I set up a business called Posse. And this was my paintings, and I had some help from the Prince's Youth Business Trust and Livewire and the local enterprise agency. And I set up my business, and the goal was to just sell my paintings. But I found that selling paintings, not everyone could afford the time or the effort or the size of the paintings that I was doing. And so I started printing greeting cards of my work. I'd also met and married the father of my children. And so together we then ran this business. He'd given up his job after a couple of years and helped me. And in 95, we bought a premises in Castle Carey, the town I still live in. And you can still see the premises. It's up by the post office and the roundhouse, which is a little round jail in the town. And I had it as a gallery and a shop. So through those blue doors, the big blue gates, there was a long courtyard and there was a long gallery there. And I was so lucky. I got to exhibit some incredible artists. And the idea was that it was solo exhibition. So I was promoting the best of an artist. And I really wanted the artists to actually be able to earn a good living as well. So this wasn't about doing something on the side or having a proper job and selling a few paintings. This was serious. So it really grew, it really developed. I had 9 years in Castle Carey, but the last 2 years I was on my own because the father of my children, when they were 1 and 3, met a shepherdess and fled. So I then had to find a new way of managing everything on myself, or on my own. And I had 2 boys, so I had to try and think about what was important to me in life. And these are some of my paintings. After having my first son, I just went down this whole new track of painting big flowers. I was just so excited about flowers. And we had a long courtyard there, so I would grow plants that I would paint. And so my paintings were these large flower paintings and on silk. And I was really inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe, an American artist. And so some of my work was perhaps inspired and influenced by her. And I was lucky that through my art, I actually got to travel to New Mexico, and I actually got to see Abiquiu and Ghost Ranch and see some of her original paintings. So my work as an artist took me all around the world. In Switzerland, America, I'd be exhibiting. So I loved it. I absolutely loved what I was doing. So who here is an artist? I'm just interested to know how many of you have actually come onto this as an artist. So just type in. And it's something that's very interesting career. And in a lot of ways, it's similar to being a beekeeper. They're both things that are meant to be a hobby. And yet you have people there who do earn living and actually have fabulous life from doing their passion. And when I was an artist, I always wanted to inspire other people, because I was so grateful to be able to do what I loved. I wanted to inspire other people to do what they loved. And I felt I wasn't going to inspire anybody if I was starving in a garret. So that classic image of an artist who never had anything, I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to be able to say to people, look, if you do this, you can then give up your horrible job and you can live life to the full. And I really believe that if we're all doing what we're passionate about, we can make the world a better place. So somebody here's asked where the name Posse came from for my business. Well, when I was just starting up my business, I remember listening to a Radio 4. See, I've always been a bit older than perhaps I look. And I was listening to this Radio 4 program, which was talking about business names. And they said that the most successful business names began with a consonant and had 2 syllables because people would remember it. Now, when I was at school, my nickname was Po, because I didn't like polos, and Paula wasn't really a name anyone could shorten. So it was one of those things where you're all sat around trying to think, what nickname can you have? So I did get called Polo and Po for a long time. And so Po and Paula's silk paintings and then Posse came about. And it was just before the Radio 2 DJ, the UK DJ Steve Wright, had his Posse. So for somehow I always seem to miss out on that great connection, which would have been fabulous. So the flowers were always an inspiration to me. I loved to grow the flowers, and I liked the fact that the flowers were I'd be holding them in my hand, and then the energy of the flower would come out in the painting. And by painting on silk, you get a great light coming back from them. So here I am with my boys, and this is after I'd sold the gallery, and I took a year out to be a proper mum and to do up a home that we're still living in now. And then I met my current husband, Greg, and we got married. And then I had this exhibition in London in 2008, and it was a fabulous success. I was sharing it with two other artists, and we were in Cork Street in London, and I just loved it. But I'd been having periods of feeling very poorly, and I'd be really tired. And it's very interesting, the connection with Georgia O'Keeffe, because when I read her autobiographies and her letters, she would often collapse after an exhibition, and she would have weeks in bed where she couldn't move. And quite often she even missed her private views because she was just so exhausted. And so I thought, well, maybe that's it. I'm just an emotional artist, and the energy that goes into putting on an exhibition was just too much for me. So I had this exhibition in London, and the highlight for me was this painting here. Now, I'd been growing cannas for years and years, and my garden was full of 1 to 3 exotic plants that I had nurtured, and then I would paint. And the studio that I'm talking to you from now, which is a wooden shed in my garden, outside were all these bright orange cannas. And so every time I would come and go to my studio for about 2 or 3 months of the year, there'd be these cannas in bloom, which I just adored, but I hadn't figured out how to paint them. And they'd get the raindrops on them, and I just adored them. So this painting was actually in my head for about 6 or 7 years. And then for the exhibition in London, on the last sort of 6 months for the exhibition, I produced this painting, and I loved it. And I knew it was the best painting I'd ever done. The vibrancy of the colours, the energy of it, I loved the actual painting of it. So when it was hung in the gallery, it literally glowed. And so many people were drawn to it and just going, wow, that's just such a magical painting. And so I put a magical price on it, because I just thought, I need to be inspirational. I'm exhibiting in London. This has really got to be worth it. And I always said to artists, I used to coach artists when I had the gallery, and I used to say, when you sell a painting, people always say, how much do you charge for a painting? How do you know what to charge for it? And the thing is, when you sell a painting, it's actually got to make you feel that you're grateful to have sold it. It's no good if you've sold it and you still haven't, you still can't eat, or you can't do anything. So when I would run an exhibition, either for an artist or for someone else, or for my own work, I would say, right, what do you want to achieve at the end of this exhibition? And obviously you want to pay your framing bill, and if you can have a break or a holiday. And because I was feeling tired, I would often think, well, after this exhibition, I want to be able to have a few weeks off. And quite often it would be 2 years of work to produce work for an exhibition. So you may look at artists' work and think, gosh, that's a lot of money. But if they're not earning any money for 2 years, and then if they only get 2 years income from selling all the paintings, it's very hard then to make a real difference in your own life, let alone in other people's. So this painting was put up for a 5-figure sum, and I actually sold it for a 5-figure sum. And what was even more extraordinary was the guy that bought it, he bought another 3 paintings that were 4-figure sums. So I was just top of my game. And from this exhibition, I then got invited to exhibit at Art in Action, which was going to be July in 2009. So I had just under a year to prepare for that. But as 2008 went on, I was building up to my 40th birthday. I was 2 years into my marriage, and I really wanted another child. And I'd always wanted a little girl, a daughter. And I had 2 sons, and I was just really hopeful. And so when I'd feel ill and tired, I'd think, oh, well, perhaps I'm pregnant, perhaps I'm going to have another baby. And so I'd have a couple of weeks where in between school runs, I would just be in bed. And then I would go and have tests at the doctors, and then they would just say, I'm sorry, we can't find anything wrong with you, and no, you're not pregnant. And this went on, and then these periods of illness got closer and closer together, and I would be getting to the stage where it would be for a longer period of time. So instead of a week, it would then be 2 weeks, or then it would be 3 weeks. And for my 40th birthday, I actually was in a position where I could only drink champagne, which was quite funny, but that really was the only alcohol that I could cope with. And I knew that something wasn't right. And then as the year went on, just after my 40th, I just started to get more and more sick, and things just weren't right. And I was feeling like my whole body was electric. It was just buzzing. Interesting that it was buzzing. And so I then found that each day was getting harder and harder, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then one day I found that I was like this. I couldn't move. I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't cope with any sound. I couldn't be touched. And I had to be in a dark room. So I wore these eye masks. I had earplugs, and I just would lay in bed. And I was in this state for 7 years. And through that 7 years, I would build up so that I could have a few hours a day where I could do something else. So a lot of this time was spent meditating, really, because that was all I could do. And I've always tried to be positive, and I'd always try and think, well, this is happening for a reason. But there was a huge amount of grief, tremendous grief, because I really wanted to carry on painting, and I wanted to exhibit, and I wanted to change the world. I wanted to have my paintings in Hawaii. I wanted more and more of these big paintings that I love doing, and to get them into big galleries. I would love to have been exhibiting at the amazing gallery in Chicago that I spent so much time in last year when I visited and spoke to Frank's group. So this is the point that my book starts, and where I had to make the most awful phone call. And they say that when you can tell your story and no longer cry, that you're healed. But just this bit often does still give me a bit of a wobble. And I've never liked to let people down or give up on anything. And I had to phone up the organisers for Art in Action, which was going to be the transformational exhibition of my career, because that's where the museums and art galleries go to look at artists that they're going to buy work from to put in international collections and national collections. And although I had lots of private collectors of my work, I didn't have any paintings in big national galleries. And so for the whole 20 years of my art career, I'd really wanted to be at Art in Action. And finally, I'd had the invitation. And then this illness meant I had to phone up and cancel and just say, I can't do it. And it was just devastating. It was heartbreaking. I was crying the whole time on the phone. The poor woman on the other side was crying too. And I just was convinced that she was thinking I was just being lazy, or I'd had a better offer. And so it really was heartbreaking. And that was probably the toughest turning point for me. But at the same time, by letting that go, I then had to start thinking about who am I and what am I and where am I going next? So what I had to do was think not what I can't do or what will I do if I ever get better, because I still didn't know what was wrong with me. So I would think, well, what can I do now? And I think that is one of the most important lessons for us all, is what can we do now? Not when things are better, when you have more money, when you've got the ideal family. None of this. It's what can you do now? And I knew that I'd always wanted to keep bees. And I had no idea why. I just had this feeling that I should keep bees. And I knew that if I lay in bed, I could look out the window, and if there was a hive in our garden, because my bedroom's on the ground floor, I could watch bees. And so that's what I wanted. So I nagged and nagged. And my husband finally bought me a beehive, and he was saying, well, why should I get you a beehive? You can't even get out there and look after the bees. And I just knew if I had the hive, the bees would come and it all would be well. And I had this vision of growing up in Dorset. We had to study Thomas Hardy, and his books were a great sort of backdrop to my whole youth and my whole life. In fact, all the landscapes are in the books. And Far From the Madding Crowd was one that I had to study for O-level. So I really knew that very well. And there was the fabulous film with Julie Christie in. And what I loved about that film was this powerful woman of substance who would have these love affairs and marriages, but at the end of the day, she was this strong woman who recovered from adversity. And there's a scene in the film where Julie Christie is dressed in the most beautiful white linen, and she is up this ladder, up a tree, and she's catching a swarm of bees with a basket, a woven skein basket. And I just thought, wow, what an amazing life that would be, just to be wearing white linen and climbing up trees. I thought that would be fabulous. So that's what I visualized. So I had a hive that looked like the kind of hive Julie Christie would have had. So after about 6 years of being ill, I finally got a diagnosis from a geneticist, which was Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So it meant I had a genetic condition that prevented me from ever recovering. Apparently, I would never walk again. It means that the connective tissue in my body doesn't heal. And so by the time I'd got to 40, from all this vigorous painting and lots of vigorous walking and marching and probably quite a lot of stress, had just taken its toll, and my body now was unable to heal. And there was no hope. Absolutely no hope. They just said, well, we can give you painkillers and we can give you antidepressants, because obviously you're going to be depressed because this is a pretty dire situation. Now, throughout the whole time that I'd been ill, I'd been researching my body, and I'd been detoxing, and I'd been trying lots and lots of different therapies. So I was already quite aware of what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome meant. I had done lots of research on it. It took me nearly 2 years from when I first thought that might be what was making me ill before I could even get the diagnosis. And so I could then visualize what was happening in my body. And because I'd spent so much time laying on my bed visualizing things, and that was a way of coping. So if I had to go out in a wheelchair, I would have to visualize how I would get from the bed to the front door. And then we've got a gravel drive, so you can't really pull a wheelchair along a gravel drive. So it would be thinking about ramps. It would be thinking about how many steps I would have to take, whether I'd have sticks, who would help me. So everything I ever did had been pre-planned in my head. And so then what I did is change that into transforming my life. So rewriting how I wanted to live. And so I became a patient of amazing, I just love all these coincidences, but a medicinal herbalist who moved into my town. And had she been in her original place, it would have been too far for me to visit, but moving to Castle Carey meant I could see her. And so I was a patient of hers for 8 months, and I did everything she said. And we then found that after 8 months, I no longer needed the wheelchair. So I had sticks, and I could walk with the sticks, but I couldn't actually picture that I'd ever work again. So it was very much a case of, I can walk a bit with sticks, I can now look after my children, but I'm not actually going to be able to have a job or go back to painting. But it was such an amazing feeling that I could now be more of a mum. And if we had big trips, I could go out in the wheelchair, but mainly I was going to be okay. So then after 8 months, I then met sort of various people who I'd met through my illness, and people that were interested in how I was recovering. And then I came across this amazing bit of information. Linus Pauling won Nobel Prizes for his work on minerals. And these are plant-based minerals that are very different to the metallic minerals that you'd get in your standard chemist. Now, he believed that you could trace every sickness, every disease, and every ailment to a mineral deficiency. And so through this, I then found out about these, and I started taking these tablets. And these are just little capsules or sizzling wafers that you put in water, and you get the minerals. And what was amazing was that 2 weeks after taking these minerals, I was going up to London with my son. who was actually doing a week's work experience. And I had done the same 2 years earlier with my eldest son, but I'd been in a wheelchair then. So this time I was thinking, great, I can go to London. I'll still be in the hotel, sort of laying flat on the bed all day, but in the evenings we can go out. And this time I will actually be able to walk with sticks. But what was extraordinary was it was a really, really hot week. And we chose a hotel that would enable me to walk to restaurants, so we'd have a good choice of places to eat in the evenings. So it wasn't too far out. And also there was a bus stop outside, and I'd not really used buses much in London. I'd either walked or occasionally used the tube. So I knew London quite well from my youth. And it was really, really hot. And what I found that was extraordinary was I wanted to do things. I wanted to visit people. I wanted to go and see places. So I'd get on the bus. I'd plan in my head where I would go. And I planned all the buses so I could go there, be dropped off, picked up and come back again, so I could minimize any walking. But what I found one day was I was coming back on the bus and it was really hot. I mean, I don't know if anybody here has been in London in the really hot weather, and you just find that you just can't you just can't cope with that heat. So what I did was I then just automatically got off the bus and thought, well, I'll walk back from here because I know where I am. And then I'd get back to the hotel and think, oh my goodness, I've just walked such a distance, and I'd not walked forever. So it was amazing, because throughout the whole time I was ill, once I'd let go of not painting again, what I really missed was walking. That was what I loved, was being out in nature and walking. And so to be able to walk was incredible. So I then started to get better, even though I was told I'd never get better. And that was another big shift, because you have to then rewrite, well, who am I if I'm now well? What am I going to do? So I had to test that I really was well. So I planned a walk with my husband, and we walked from Weymouth to Swanage, which was a walk that I had done many, many times in my head while I was ill. And I'd also walked parts of it many, many times before I was ill. So we did that walk, and it took us 2 days. First day was like this, beautiful sunshine, as you can see in the photograph. Second day was horrifically cold, wet, windy, and we were drenched to the skin. But we actually did it. And I even made sure that my husband took the minerals as well, because I didn't want him giving up halfway on the walk because he had a dodgy knee or had tired legs. So since then, our whole family have been on these minerals. So who else has done the Dorset coast? I'm really interested to know if you can picture these steep hills, and have you actually done that walk? I mean, I'd practiced back in 2002. I did the Inca Trail with my mum, and we had been practicing our walks while we were down on the Dorset coast. And so if ever anybody says they're going to do the Inca Trail, then I just say, oh, well, you just got to practice on the Dorset coast. If you can do that, you can do anything. The only difference is you don't have the high altitude, but the chalky cliffs and these steep inclines, really, really tough. So here we go. So once I knew I was well, I was really wondering, like, what can I do with myself, because now I'm well and I need to do something that can actually help me get better. So it was really an opportunity for me to use my imagination and my entrepreneurial skills. So what I did was, my husband had been making cider as a hobby, and I'd been studying herbal medicine since I'd been a patient of Lucy Jones. And so I decided to start having a pop-up Paula at my local market. So I'd really missed having the gallery in the centre of the town. And I knew most people in the town, although they hadn't seen much of me for the last few years. So what I did then was I started to put together herbal teas. I had honey from my bees, and I had my husband's cider and his apple juice. So I set up Carnell's of Castle Carey, and what I loved was being at the market each week and just seeing people, and it was just so exciting. But I was also able to tell people about what I was doing with the bees. And what I'd learned from looking after my own bees was that honey was their medicine. It was their healing. It was their food. It was everything for the bees. And so I really did not want to be keeping bees so that I could be taking all the honey. That wasn't what I was doing. I was trying to actually give my bees a healthy start. And in my book, I actually talk about how the first time I'd had a honey extraction with my mentor, a wonderful local beekeeper, Chris, and how horrified I was when we took all this honey off. I was delighted with that. We bottled it all and we shared it. And but then the next time we visited the hive, he took this big block of fondant sugar and put it on the hive. And I was like, what are you doing? And he said, well, we have to feed the bees because we've taken the honey. And I was absolutely devastated. I'd had my whole illness. I understood about the importance of not eating sugar. I knew how toxic sugar was, how addictive it was, and how bad it was for us. And I wouldn't give it to myself. I tried not to give it to my children. What they ate when they weren't in my control is a whole different matter. But I certainly wouldn't dream of giving something that's so processed to a wild animal, which are what bees are. So this is the foundations of my way of keeping bees. And because I'd come from my own health and my own nutrition, it was very difficult to change or to even accept what was conventional beekeeping. And so I would go to conventional beekeeping meetings and just challenge everything. I didn't like using smoke because I felt that would create a stress response because the bees think that their houses are on fire. So there was all these little things that I was thinking, why do we do this? Why do we do this? But who was I? I'd only been keeping bees a few years, whereas many people keeping bees have been keeping them for, 40 years, 20 years. So who was I? Some artist who suddenly thought she knew better about bees. So what I had to do was become a bee expert so that I could justify what I intuitively felt was right. So the Natural Beekeeping Trust was a really great source of information because they are very much based on bee-centered beekeeping. And their symbol or their logo is the sun hive. And here's a sun hive that I made. I went on a course and made this sun hive. But what I wasn't quite in alignment with was they didn't believe in taking any honey. And you have the conventional beekeepers, which were very much all about the honey. And then you have the natural beekeepers, which is more about letting bees be wild or being in the trees. And I really felt that honey was medicine. I felt intuitively that we were connected with bees and that there had to be some justification for having some honey or some propolis from the hive. So I carried on learning and studying and reading. And then the more I learned, the more I fell in love with bees. And what I love is when you see a swarm, so often they make a heart shape. So I do feel the bees love us and they are here to heal us. And so it's finding a way of working with them so that we both win. So through doing the markets, I had an incredible opportunity, which in my normal nature, I always say yes. I say yes first and then think about how I'm going to do it later. But I decided that I would take up this opportunity, which was initially just to see what I could do with bees for this place that was opening up just 2 miles from where I lived. And the idea was to have some bees in their orchards, but they had no idea about the potential. And when I went for a visit and was told about what the plans were for this place that is now called the Newt in Somerset, so do type in there. I know that many of you on here today have actually visited there. So when I heard what they were doing and they were interested in bees, I went home and I spent a month and I put together a proposal of all the exciting things you could do with bees with a place like the Newt. So what's wonderful about the Newt, for those of you that don't know, is it's a hotel and it's also gardens and it's a cider production and a farm. So the idea is that your food and your cider all comes from the farm and people can stay in the hotel. And it's just beautiful. And they have a sister project in South Africa called Babylon Storen. So I put in this proposal and incredibly, they said, great, will you come and do it? So I spent a year doing it with one of my bee team members, Joe Bleasdale, who's been keeping bees for 40 years. and another beekeeper who was new to beekeeping, but had also been one of my carers while I was ill, a lady called Linda. And after a year of establishing bees, so to start with, there was only one colony there. There was one colony in a tree, a wild colony, and then there was one colony in a worry hive. And so I was really certain that I was not going to be buying in bees. So for those of you who don't know, the normal way to start keeping bees is you buy a package and they come in the post. And I had a message from someone today actually who was saying they're not sure if they can join today because they've got a package of bees coming. So I didn't want to do that because in the UK we've had, they can be 15,000 queen bees imported every year. And we have a real problem with disease with bees. We have problems with the breeding. And what I wanted to do was establish a network of native bees, so bees that were native to the environment they live in. Now, all colonies will expand. And so it made sense that if I worked with the colonies we had, and if I worked in this amazing estate where there were so many trees, I knew that there would be some wild bees. So who here is a beekeeper? Do let me know. So type yes in the comments, and then I can see who the beekeepers are. So this already was quite an unconventional way of keeping bees, to actually just see if I could catch any swarms, to split the colonies I had. Oh, hi, Debbie. So got a beekeeper. So the lucky thing was that the Newt only opened last year. So I had 2 years to actually build up what I was planning to do without having the public coming in and without having to explain too much about what I was doing. So here's some of my bee team. Oh, Olga, so you're a beekeeper too. Whereabouts are you based? So I know I've got some honey and bee friends from all over the place. So it's really interesting to see how we can all come together. So this is my bee team. I have Joe on the left, who I mentioned earlier, Linda, there's me with the lime green, and then Randy on the right. And so we've been working together. Oh, Frank. So I've got one dangerously handsome beekeeper on the talk today. Wonderful. And yes, I think I can confirm that you are dangerously handsome, Frank. So that's part of our team. And then we've got an additional team member who's Kerry. So here's Kerry working with me. And that was with a client, a farm where there was some bees that had been attacked by badgers. Oh, hello, Alex. Wonderful. A bee artist. Now you are the combination of all the wonders. Wonderful bee artist too is Alex. So those of you who can see the comment, you just must look up Alex's work. And those of you who are a beekeeper, you know that we do our work on the hottest days of the year wearing too many layers. So 2 layers, if you're working with a hive that you don't know, then you've got to make sure that you can protect yourself as much as possible from stings. And this was some work we were doing a couple of weeks ago, and it really, really was the hottest day yet. And we were so hot, and we'd had to take apart this hive and cut out comb and put it into a new hive, and the bees were so gentle and calm, but we couldn't risk taking our suits off. And so this little bit of shade under a tree was just magical. So we went from being about 40 degrees down to sort of 28, and it felt amazing. And I do love this photo. So that's Kerry, who's another one of our team members, but because of lockdown we haven't had to have a group, we haven't been able to have a group photo. So I'm very passionate about keeping healthy bees because I learned lots about my health. So what is a healthy bee? Good question. Oh, hello, David. Gosh, master beekeeper, honoured. So you have to know really what is an unhealthy bee. And this is what we hear most about, is the bees that are suffering with varroa, that are dying out, the CC, the colony collapse disorder, where bees are just being found dead outside their hives. So we're all hearing about unhealthy bees. And there has been a lot of practice of using chemicals, very similar to human health, to try and rid ourselves of disease. Now, on some of my bee talks, I talk a lot more about the naturopathic perspective, which is basically looking at the individual's immune system. So it's looking at how we can improve our own immune system to protect ourselves from disease. And so that is the core of both my own health recovery and health maintenance, but also the core of my belief on everything that I do with the bees. So what I'm trying to do is understand more about how we can keep our bees healthy. So by following their natural rhythms and their natural way of living and learning about what they do in the wild, and then transferring that into a way that we can have healthy bees, because we need the healthy bees. There's also a question then, so if bees are healthy in the wild, then are beekeepers good or bad for bees? And there's a wonderful scientist, a Swiss scientist called Peter Neumann, and he does a fabulous talk. So those of you who are beekeepers and members of associations, if ever you can get Peter Neumann to talk, he's really fascinating. And he's one of the leaders of the Colos organization, which is researching about the effects of bees. And he says quite clearly that the biggest risk to bees is beekeepers. So if you want to know more about that, I will talk about that both in my book and in on other talks. So I then became interested in where the bees are healthy. So was there a connection in geography? You know, are there places in the world where bees are perhaps cared for in a different way and where they may be more healthy? So that became a real passion of mine. And then I wanted to know, what can we do to help? How can we help make bees healthy? So, right now, oh, I've got a little glitch here. Ah, here we go. So this is some bees up at the newt on the I'm not quite sure how I can now get to the next. Here we go. So what I do then is I have all sorts of different hives. So we have the WBC hives, which are like mine at home. And I love these. Not only do they look pretty, so they're a real artist hive, but you have the standard body of a national hive, and then it has these outer lifts, which give it extra insulation. And what I like for these is, if you're going to be taking honey from bees, it's a bit easier to manage, but also with climate change, it gives them added insulation. But if you're a beginner beekeeper and you don't want to be fiddling too much, you can actually lift the lid, and because you've got these lifts, it gives them a bit of extra protection, and so it's easier to have a peek inside without upsetting the bees too much. And one of the things I learned quite early on is that when you open up a hive and you're taking out all the frames, it can take up to 10 days for the hive to re-regulate its temperature, which is a real concern. And if you're being encouraged to open up every week just to be looking for queen cells or to be looking for disease, then that's a real stressor to the bees. So we have to think, how can we be looking for disease and keeping, taking care of our bees without upsetting them too much? So a lot of our work is sat looking from the outside, and you can learn so much from seeing what the bees are bringing into the hive, from seeing what their flight patterns, from listening to the buzz. The smell of a good healthy hive is just intoxicating and very addictive. So there's so much you can learn, and by understanding the life cycle of the bees, you can then tell what's going on inside by spending a bit more time just sat watching and being with the bees. And as you know your colonies, you get a lot of instinct. So I'm sure those of you who are beekeepers have found times where you've perhaps woken up and you've just thought, oh, I must go and visit that hive. You've got a feeling that you need to go and see them. And that's happened quite often to me and to many people I've spoken to, where you're suddenly comes to mind about a particular hive that you may have out in an orchard somewhere, and you go there and you find that a badger's knocked it over, or the wind has taken the lid off, or something's happened and they need help. So I love that whole spiritual connection that we can have with bees. And there are some wonderful beekeepers who have bees talking to them in their dreams and write about that. So there's so much we can develop with our work with bees. So this is a freedom hive which hangs up in a tree. So it mimics how the bees would live inside a tree. And this is actually insulated as well. So I've had a lot of success with using freedom hives. And this is inside, so you can see how the bees have to make their own wax comb all the way down. Now, this is something I was asked once, which really shocked me. Somebody said, what do bees need honey for anyway? And I was stunned, because to me, it had always been obvious that bees ate their own honey. But then I realized, gosh, not everybody's even thought about this. Now, one of the most important things that bees need honey for is to make wax. And they need 8 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So when a colony is swarming, they have to engorge their stomachs with honey. They fill themselves up so that when they find a new home, they've got enough honey that they can start making wax combs straight away. And with these hives, because they don't have frames with wax already in, they need to have a lot of honey to actually be able to store, to actually make their wax. And then the queen can start laying eggs, and they've got more storage space for the honey and nectar they collect throughout the year. So this is a golden hive, which I really love. And this is one big deep brood body. And you have frames, but they're not just a top bar where the wax hangs down. They are actually a proper frame, but it's very deep. And these are really lovely, lovely hives. And we're experimenting with taking honey. So sometimes you can take a frame. So they will tend to have the brood at one end and then the honey at the other. But as with bees, they're all different. And sometimes they have brood and honey on all the frames just to stop you taking any honey. But we're working now on putting supers on top. And this year's been an interesting year where we had an early burst of swarms, but now we've got colonies that we thought would swarm because they're big and filling up their hive, but the weather hasn't been right and the drought has prevented them from swarming. So yeah, really interesting times. So we have to, every year seems to be different. But at the Newt now, where we started off with the 2 colonies, we now have 18 colonies. And a lot of that has been done by using bait hives. So here's a bait hive that's hanging up in a tree, and the frames inside this hive match the golden hives. So what we do is we can, when this hive is full, we take the frames out and put them into a golden hive that you saw earlier. And what I love about bait hives is I started researching about where the swarms go. So where I was removing swarms from people's houses and from places where people just didn't want bees, or even where I was collecting swarms where I'd had a phone call that there were some bees clustered, I often found they were in similar places. And I was really intrigued to know why they would settle on a particular tree or a particular bush or in a particular roof. And then I came across some work by a chap called John Harding, who studied geopathic stress lines. Now I talk about that in my book as well. So, you can download the ebook of the book if you can't have it sent, but you can order the book. And I have a whole chapter about the placement of bait hives. And that is just a fascinating subject in itself. And I also found that there are beekeepers all around the world who work with dowsing and with geopathic stress lines to position their hives, to catch bees, to manage health of bees. So there's, again, a whole new science out there that can be discovered. Now, here's one of the wild colonies. We've got 3 wild colonies at the Newt in Somerset, and there's loads of wild colonies in the area around here. And if you look carefully, you should be able to see them. Just as the light catches them, you'll just see these little dots flying around. Now, this is a colony in a lime tree, and lime trees are just flowering now. And if you get the chance to go for a walk, if the sun's out over this weekend, just go for a walk, find a big lime tree and just stand under it, and you can smell the blossom and you can hear the tree buzzing, because lime trees attract all the native bees. So you'll have bumblebees, solitary bees, it'll just be full of them. So it's wonderful. So Alex has just asked, what bait do I use? So when I have a bait hive, we put a bit of bee crud, as Matt Somerville, who makes the golden hives and the freedom hives, he always calls it, he has a bag of bee crud, and that would be the old wax comb and old bits that you'll find from an old colony, and we'll put that in the hive. We'll rub a bit of beeswax on the tops of the frames, but then we use a bit of lemongrass oil, and the bees find that absolutely irresistible. So lemongrass oil is really good. But saying that, all too often you can have an old beehive that you've just got overgrown somewhere, it's been empty for a while, and a swarm will move straight in and they'll clean it out and they'll be in there. So the bees, they sort things out. They normally, if they want to go somewhere, they'll go there. But it's quite good if you can predict where they would like to be and then put your bait hive up. So this is inside one of the freedom hives, and you can see how the comb has been made, and they always have this special space in between. And so this is the healthy bees. They have that balance in the hive. So they've got the room, they've got their own natural comb, they can have a good ventilation in there. They can line their hive with propolis. Now, propolis is incredible stuff. And I went to a Natural Beekeeping Trust conference in Holland, and there was some amazing speakers. And we were talking about how often beekeepers talk about the colony with the name of the queen. So we've got Queen Sylvia, Queen Alison, and we will say she is bringing in pollen or she is producing honey. And yet there's 50,000 bees there. There's one queen, there's 49,000 worker bees who are all female, and then there'll be a few hundred male bees, drones, but not throughout the whole year. And we talk about the colony as a she and as one being. Well, we know that the colony can't exist if the queen dies, although they will try and reproduce a queen. But if they don't have a queen, they can't live for more than 2 or 3 weeks. And a single bee, if it is separated from the hive, it will die. It can't survive. And so it is the colony that is the being. It is the one thing. And if that is the one thing, what is their skin? What is it that holds them together? Now, one of the common factors about wild colonies, whether they be in a house, in a church roof, or in a tree, is that they will line the inside with propolis. And propolis is a waxy resin that the bees take the resin from trees, they mix it with a bit of wax, a bit of honey, and all sorts of enzymes from their gut, and they mold it together and they use it to fill in the gaps. And this is an amazing substance. It's antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, and it's just incredible. But what's happened is humans have been breeding bees to not produce so much propolis because it sticks the hives together. So there was actually research done in Minnesota where they found that hives that were allowed to line themselves with propolis, as opposed to hives that weren't, if they injected a highly contagious disease, European foul brood, into the hives that actually have the propolis don't succumb to the disease. Now, that's just incredible. So it just shows again about the natural immunity. If you've got a strong skin, if you've got your own good bacteria, your body will fight most illnesses. So swarming is also another natural process. It gives the bees a brood break. It means that if they are infested with mites, the varroa mites, if they swarm, there's a break, and so that just helps. And I talk about that more in beekeeping course talks. And also honey production. If the bees are producing honey, then they're doing what they're meant to be doing, so they're healthy. So that's a good sign. So who here is a new beekeeper? You know, I'd love to hear who's just experimenting or got their first year with bees. So type yes in the comments. Now, I mentioned earlier about a beekeeper's good or bad for bees. Well, this is a prime example. I had a call out a couple of years ago from a farmer who said, "Oh, could you come and check my bees?" And he said the badger's got them and it's ripped the side off the hive. So I said, well, yes, of course. So, you know, how long have you had the bees there? And when did you last check them? And he said, well, 35 years ago. I said, oh, so you've had the bees there 35 years? He went, yes. I said, when did you last check them? 35 years ago. And they were actually his grandfather's bees. And he, when his grandfather had died, nobody had really wanted to take them over. So these bees had lived in this hive, this national hive, for 35 years, completely untouched. until the badger could smell the honey and got hungry one day and ripped the side off. So we were called in and we had to try and figure it out. And this was the project that the photograph earlier showed us, laying flat in the grass after stage 2. So over 2 years, we've been working with this colony. We've split them and we've been changing the old comb and the old frames. But the frames were so rotten that when you went to pull them out, the ends came off and the frame just stayed there. So we tried to sort of adapt things, but now they're all in completely new frames. We've cut out all the wax comb. So it showed that they had survived. And when we did that first job for them, we'd actually forgotten to put our veils on. We were working with them because it felt quite urgent, and none of us were stung, and they were so gentle. The second time, when we split the colony and we tried to put them into a new hive, then they weren't quite so friendly. And then this last time that we were just finishing off the job, they were just amazing. But no disease, no sign of varroa, plenty of honey, really healthy bees, and just a joy to see. So what we do have to learn is perhaps we need the bees more than they need us. So honey is the big thing about bees. And one of my herbal medicine tutors was or is Islamic, and he's from Pakistan. And one of our courses, we have residential courses, and over a mealtime he asked me if I'd read the Quran, which I hadn't. And he said, well, you should, because there's a chapter called The Bee. So I promptly went and ordered a copy of the Quran and was flicking through and trying to find this chapter about the bees, which I then read. And it just sent shiver down my spine, because I was looking for this spiritual connection with bees and honey. And in the Quran, there's a paragraph that says, put the hives in the mountains, in the trees, and where they choose, and from their bellies emerges a fluid of diverse colours, and this contains healing for the people, and surely in this is a sign for those who reflect. And I was like, oh my goodness me, that's so powerful. So we all love our honey. And now I could find that God had said, honey's healing. So I have this little necklace, which I'm going to try and show you a minute. There we go. Can you see? Now that is how much honey a bee will produce in its whole lifetime. So that is 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So honey really is precious. So although we all love our honey, you really have to think how much that's a lifetime's work for one bee. So when we are taking honey, we really need to think about, what we're doing. Do we really need it? Are we using it as a medicine? And, how can we really take care of our bees and be sure that we're doing the right thing? So I'm sure you all love honey. So just type yummy if you like your honey. And I love my honey. And so I wanted to learn more about honey, and particularly the medicinal properties. So we've all heard of Manuka honey. And I really felt strongly that the medicine for me didn't have to come from New Zealand. With herbal medicine studies, I was understanding that the herbs that we need for us grow all around us. So I really wanted to be sure that what honey we had was as good for us as the Manuka. So here I went onto a course in Bologna, which was honey sensory analysis. And what I wanted to do was understand how honey, how it tastes so different. And here in the UK, I'd got used to only tasting honey that was from my area. So I wasn't aware of the huge amount of varieties of honey. And on this course in Bologna, we had to learn 18 different honeys. So back in 2017, I attended the first time they'd run the course in English, and I met beekeepers and scientists and all kinds of incredible people from all around the world. And we were working together to try and understand the complex flavors and aromas so that we could detect a honey and detect its flower source, its plant source. Because although there are you can have tests with microscopes. They're based on how much pollen is in a honey. And because bees often don't collect pollen and nectar from the same plant source, you can have a bit of an issue trying to decide which one is which. And also there's a big problem with honey adulteration. So you need to be able to detect a honey from the actual taste of it. So honey sensory analysis is a really important job. And this weekend, I'm actually judging for the International London Honey Awards. So I've been sent 35 samples, because we all have to do it now online and from our own homes rather than all meeting up together. And so this has been a lot of work that keeps growing with tasting different honeys and getting to understand the different varieties and the plant sources and how to detect a tainted honey that's not so good. So this taste of honey and this interest in honey then excited me to travel. And I was very lucky that my husband was working in Oman and I had the opportunity to go and visit him. And so before I went, I started to do a bit of research and I just thought, gosh, I wonder what they do with bees in Oman. And I managed to send out a load of emails and I heard back from an amazing chap called Dr. Hassan. And he shared with me, he agreed to meet up with me, and he shared with me this amazing apiary in the mountains, rural mountains of Oman. And it was just fabulous to actually be able to meet beekeepers. There was a 94-year-old beekeeper, and they're keeping bees in the traditional way in date palm logs. So they're hollowed out and the bees make their comb in there. And so to be in an Islamic country where the people were very gracious and pray before every interaction in their lives. They pray before they eat, they pray after they eat, they pray when they meet people, they pray when they approach the bees, they pray when they're working with the bees. And I loved this connection. And the bees seemed to be really healthy, really happy, and producing a lot of honey. So it got me thinking that if we have that spiritual connection with the bees, do they then want to heal us? If we're open to how we can help them, so what is our role? What can we do to help them? So I then traveled around Oman, and we were lucky. Actually, Helen, who's on the call here, she told me about Nizwa Market, which is a goat market. So we made a special point of going to visit that. And I saw this chap who was selling this wild comb of Hamal honey, which was just magical. And I was able to taste a bit. I couldn't buy it and bring it home, unfortunately, but I could taste it. And it had an almondy flavour, and it tasted quite unlike any other honey. Now, up to date, I've tasted about 300 different honeys, and it's only the last 2 weeks that I tasted a honey that tasted anything like this, and it came from some bees at the Newt. And we think it was a mixture of wild cherry and clover honey. So I'm very interested to know about the family groups of plants and if there's certain aromas or tastes that have medicinal properties that are transferred with plants. So it's really interesting. There's still so much more to learn. So then I went to South Africa. That was to run some workshops at Babylon Storen. And there I saw bees, which were a different species of bees. They're Apis capensis, and they just live around the Cape of South Africa, and their main forage is the fynbos plants, and they produce lots and lots of propolis. And that was the first time I'd seen propolis. And then I also got to learn about the pseudoscorpions. So I talk about that in another talk as well, but pseudoscorpions is a really fascinating subject, and just to see how the bees were protecting themselves. And what I love about Babylon Storen is that the bees are kept in a very natural way. So there's small extractions of honey throughout the year. So instead of taking a whole super off in one go, it would be individual frames, which is what we do at the Newt. And I learnt a lot, and it was a magical time. And I ran some honey tasting workshops. You're not able to bring honey into South Africa. So what I had to do was find local honeys from South Africa, and we tasted those. And again, I learnt even more about honeys. And they've got some amazing different hives there as well. And this is me opening up a hive with a group of visitors that had come to Babylon Store, and we had done a bee, well, we did a few bee days, which were just fabulous. So I got to go there twice at different times of the year, and just to see the different plants and how the bees were doing at those times. So I've been really lucky to experience bees in different countries, and that's when you really get to learn. And it's amazing how in different parts of the world people do things differently with bees, and people have their things that they've always done that we didn't know about. And so what I love doing, and what I feel my mission is connecting all these bits of wisdom from around the world. So in 2018, just before I was 50, or for my 50th, I decided, because it had been 10 years since I had been ill, and I was now feeling on top of the world. So I wanted to be on top of the world. So I went to Bhutan on my own, and I spent 3 weeks there traveling around, meeting beekeepers and wild bees. And that ended up, it was going to be just a chapter in a book that I'm writing called Spiritual Being, but it ended up being a whole book, which I published last year. And next month, I'm actually going to do a webinar just on the bees in Bhutan, because I learned so much from that. And from the bees in Bhutan, I then got asked to do a presentation at Apimondio, which is a big international bee conference. And from that, I then met more and more bee scientists and researchers from all around the world. And it's just amazing, the opportunities. So I'm currently working with some honey producers in Madagascar, and we're helping them to plant more trees, because the trees feed the bees. And the beekeepers know this, so they're the guardians of their forests. And it's just so important that we support each other. And they have honey at times of year that we don't have honey. And because there's no chemicals used in the agriculture and in the forests in Madagascar, the honey there is organic, and it's just chemical-free, pure honey. And it's very difficult for us in the UK to have such pure honey, because we don't have a large enough area that is not treated with chemicals in the farming. So this is the other thing that's so important, is how can we really help the bees? So I believe the medicine for us, and particularly where I live, is dandelions. And dandelions are a wonder herb. And they also connect with the minerals, because what dandelions do is they're deep tap roots, dig deep into the ground, and they release the minerals calcium and potassium. And those minerals are then found in the leaves and in the petals of the flowers. So if you eat those leaves, or if the bees visit the nectar, they get those minerals. Now, if you don't pick those dandelions and the seeds take flight, those seeds will only settle in land that needs those minerals correcting. So if you leave a field long enough, and the field behind me here, when I first came here 15 years ago, was full of dandelions. It actually looked like this. And now this year, it was only about 25% covered in dandelions, but the dandelions have now moved to our little orchard and into our garden. And it's like a movement of the minerals under the soil. And Jacqueline Freeman, in her book Song of Increase, she talks about this, and how the buzz, almost the vibration of the nectar in the plant calls the bee to it, and the bee carries that song back to the hive. And the song, or the buzz of the bees, is this map, a geographical map of the nutrition of the land around them. So if our soil is depleted and we're not getting minerals that we need, and we need mineral supplements, then obviously all our insects, and our bees in particular, are also not getting those minerals. So we really need to look at the whole of what we're doing to our environment. We are not separate, we are part of it. And from years and years of poisoning dandelions, digging them up, the soil is not able to correct itself. And those dandelions will just shift and move. So if you have patience, and my childhood was spent picking dandelions out from my father's lawn, and he's still got dandelions on his lawn. And yet I can show him that this field here, they've moved on because no one's been there picking them. So we still need to learn a lot more about the different plants. And although I've got books on pharmacology and I've got books on plants, there still needs to be more research on the mineral content of the different weeds, the plants that we just disregard and we think are pests. In actual fact, they're restoring the land wherever they go. And there was an amazing project done at the Welsh Botanic Gardens, where they have bees and they have 8,000 species of amazing plants in these gardens. And they were really intrigued to know which plants the bees were going to make their honey. And they were astonished that when they got the results, the main sources were 11 native species. And they were bramble, so our blackberries, they were lime, they were the hedgerows, the willow, the dandelions, and borage. It was just all the weeds, all the things that we disregard. And so it's really important that we listen to the bees. And if we've got this connection with them, if we're going to take honey from the bees, we have to be sure that we're giving them the good nutrition and the right food to enable them to produce the honey. And I even saw in the last 2 weeks, there's some more research now about bees and how their nutrition is failing, and that affects the fertility of the drones and the queens. So just as conventional medicine is now waking up to the importance of good gut bacteria and the importance of nutrition on our health, there's now more and more evidence with bees and the bee health, and that the nutrition and their environment also affects their health. So I hope that you're all going to be enjoying dandelions now in your lawn, and you can eat the leaves. The leaves are fabulous in salads, and they're a good bitter taste, and we need those bitters to stimulate all the gut enzymes and the juices that we secrete in our mouths. So we need this variety of food, just how bees need a variety of honeys in their hive. So I just hope we're going to have lots and lots of people keeping dandelions, and that next year we'll have seas of yellow around the meadows around us. So I've got this little video of where I sprinkled some minerals outside my beehives, and I've been feeding them minerals for as long as I've been taking minerals, which is 5 years now, and they take them. And you know, I think the bees know what's good for them. So when I have swarms, or if I have colonies that I feel need a bit of a boost, instead of giving them sugar or fondant, I give them minerals. And I always keep aside some honey for them from their own colony to feed them, and always making sure that they've got enough of their own honey. So I just love this video, and just when I was able to watch them and see them coming in with the pollen and then coming out and just checking these minerals. And the good thing about the plant-based minerals is they go straight into your cells. So your body has them, they don't form toxicity, you know, they just go straight. And they're the spark plugs, they're the sort of electrical spark that we all need to stay healthy. So a lot of people ask me, what do we do? What do the bees need to eat? Well, they obviously need these minerals. So what plants are really good for minerals? So I designed a tea towel with 12 plants on there, so that you've got food throughout the year. And that's the really important thing. And particularly when the bees have, you know, where we have milder winters, the bees are flying at times of year when they wouldn't normally fly. And if they're flying, they need something to feed on. So rosemary, for instance, is a wonderful winter herb. And my rosemary has been flowering from November right to the end of February. So whenever we had mild, dry days through the winter, my bees were able to feed on the rosemary. And rosemary makes fabulous honey. And again, if you're just taking small quantities of honey, you're more likely to know that it's a particular flower source. So the other thing to really stress about feeding honey is people often say they found a bumblebee or they found a stray bee and they wanted to feed it honey. You should never, ever, ever give any bee honey unless it's from its own hive. And bumblebees and solitary bees, they will have they will collect nectar, and some will make honey, but it's only for their own food. They don't actually store it to be used later. So it's only the honeybees that create honey to be stored. And you should never mix honey from different bees. So although I collect honey from around the world, I'm really careful that none of that is accessible by any of my wild colonies, because that's how you can be transferring disease. And this is why many countries make it illegal to transport honey. But it also explains why, when you're buying honey in perhaps some larger supermarkets, why it quite often is not really honey. The good bit about the honey is all the bacteria, it's all the enzymes that have come from the bees as they've been have this process called trophallaxis, where they're exchanging the nectar between each other to just get it right. And all these wonderful enzymes make honey the medicine that it is. And if you heat honey, you kill all those enzymes, you kill all that bacteria. So when you're buying cheap honey, it's basically got very, very little goodness, if any goodness in it. So the best honey has got that good bacteria, and it's got all those good enzymes, and that's what makes honey so magical. So really, I think what I've found is that through my work with bees, I'm now finding that the bees have come into me and into my life, and now my life is my art. So the bees, the minerals, everything has connected to a state that I am now finding that interconnectedness. And this is the thing that really excites me, is that everything is connected. So everything that happened in my life has helped make me who I am now, and has had a real value and an importance. And quite often we go through times of adversity which are really tough, and we just think, why is this happening to me? This isn't fair, this isn't right. How come other people are lucky? How come other people have a good, easier life? And this is one of the things that's so important, is that you understand that we have power to change. We have so much choice. We have so many things that we can do to make life better for ourselves and for the world around us. And this is something that I think people, they feel helpless, or we wait for the governments, we wait for other people to tell us what we can and can't do. But in actual fact, if you look at it, there are 300 governments, 250 to 300 governments around the world, and yet there's 7 billion of us. So who really has the power? And if you don't agree with having bad honeys that are heated or that are adulterated, then don't buy them. If you support your local beekeepers, and if you ask your beekeepers questions, are they using chemicals in the hive? Are they feeding the bees sugar? Whatever else that might worry you, you can change the world by how you spend your money. And that is what I'm so passionate about, is actually empowering us all to make a difference, and not waiting until after you're better, or waiting until COVID is ended, waited until we go back to normal, wait until you have more money. It's do whatever you can do now. And that is what makes the world a better place. And that's what empowers us. And there's people like Lynn Franks, who's on this call as well, who has planted the seeds of change. She has this organization called Seed, which is all about planting the seeds and making the world a better place, working together, knowing where your money goes, supporting small businesses, supporting local businesses. And that's what's really going to make this world a better place. So you don't have to despair. I know there are terrible things going on all around the world, and many of us go through times of deep, deep suffering. But we do have the power to change that. If I'm able to walk and work and do what I do now, which I was told I would never be able to do, then that means we can all achieve anything. So that's the end of what I'm going to say. And what I'm going to do now is leave it open for, I'm going to have a look through and see if there are any questions. And I see I've been asked about the minerals in Canada. They are available through most of the world. If you go to the website, www.carnellsminerals.com, and then you can actually see there's a drop down for different countries. But I do have clients in certain parts of the world where they're not shipped, and I will actually send them to them. So it's growing. But again, the more people that buy the minerals or want the minerals, then they become more available in more places. So I'm so grateful that you've stayed with me and listened to my story. So I'm really excited that you felt worthy of understanding a little bit more about why I'm passionate about my work, and a bit more about how the minerals, the bees, and herb medicine and the art all come in together, and why I'm always busy, because changing the world is a big old project and there's so much I need to be doing. So I'm working, trying to connect honey producers with people that want to buy honey. I'm trying to help beekeepers to learn different ways of keeping bees so that they can have a business, how they can extract the honey, but in a spiritual way and in a way that gives them a good living, because I don't want them to be impoverished. I want people to have a good living. But I do feel that if we take care of the bees will take care of us. So thank you. So are there any good questions, or any questions in particular that I should ask? Thank you so much. Gosh, there are so many messages here. Sorry, I've been wonderful. So yeah, I suppose I'm often asked about honey and how much honey do you get from a hive? And people often say, well, we want to have bees, so how do we go about it? And I think the first thing to think about is, why do you want bees? And it's, people think, oh, I want to save the bees, so I'm going to put a hive in my garden. But what you're doing is you're introducing 50,000 more hungry mouths into your garden, and they're going to be competing with all the native solitary bees and bumblebees that you've got. So it's really important that if you're going to put a beehive in your garden, is for a start, try and capture the wild colonies who are already feeding in your area. But if you really can't do that for whatever reason, then make sure that you are planting enough food to feed that 50,000 bees. And I think that's the most important message. And then if you're going to buy plants, make sure you buy plants that don't have chemicals on, because then you'll be poisoning the bees. And if you're going to be buying food, buy food without chemicals on, because a lot of the food that we buy has been pollinated by bees. And if it's been treated with chemicals, then you've been poisoning the bees. And that's quite a harsh thing to say, but we're all responsible. And so, you know, as long as we keep buying food that has got chemicals on it, then we're contributing to poisoning the bees. And so this is why when I go to places, I ask for organic food, and people think I'm a complete fruitcake. But this is why, because I know that what is killing bees is also killing us. These chemicals are pretty strong things. And if they're disabling bees and making them infertile and affecting their nervous system, then obviously it's going to have some kind of effect on us. So that's my key message. So thank you so very, very much. Those of you who have come along and joined me today, you will be sent a link so that you can download the ebook of my A to Bs. And I really hope you'll read it. If you've already got a copy, then just share it. You know, tell everybody that they need to read this book, because I just want to spread the message far and wide, because I do want to save the bees, and we're running out of time. We've really got to make a difference now. And if you can write a review, if you enjoyed this talk, then tell your friends that they've got to come and listen to me, book me to speak. I just want to change the world. So I'm over 50 now, so I've only got perhaps 40, 50 years left, and that's a lot of work to do. So thank you very, very much. Do order the ebook, because every little penny helps me to help change the world, and helps me to do things and to do the travel where I can start helping other people in different parts of the world. So thank you very much, and farewell. And do press the share button, share this to anybody who you think should listen. And when we are out and about again, if anybody wants me to be coming and speak, speak for your group, then just ask and I'll be there. Okay, thank you very much.